Okay, welcome everyone to this talk on Frédéric Ozanam. And many of you will sit there and say, who?
Yeah.
Frédéric who? How is he related to us? Well, first of all, Ozanam as a last name is a Jewish name, and it comes from the prophet Hosea. So they believe that he came down through Hosea's line. And he is considered a French saint, but he was born in Milan, Italy. His father was a doctor and was stationed in Milan, and that's where Frédéric was born. He was one of 14 children, only 3 of whom lived to adulthood. Now just take that in. 14 children, only 3 of whom lived to adulthood. They were 3 boys, one older than him, one younger than him, and Frédéric. Frédéric was the 5th child in the family. Frédéric's sister, who he idolized, died as a teenager. But most of the others died as young children, in infancy or very early childhood. Now, I did say that Frédéric's father was a doctor. Imagine being a doctor and not being able to save 11 of your children. And when Frédéric was young, he became very ill. As we look back on it now, we think it probably was rheumatic fever. But he was unconscious, very ill. They had a relic of St. Regis, the Jesuit saint, that they were putting on him. Mother and father were just a wreck. And he opens his eyes and says, beer. He wanted some beer. So they gave him some beer, and he came to and recovered. Now, his parents always say it was the relic of St. Regis that saved him. Frédéric always says it was the beer. That gives you a sense of what he was like as a person. So his mother was so nervous, and you can imagine with these other children dying, that she didn't want to send him to school. So they were homeschooling him. And he was desperate to go to school like the other children. So when he was 7, he made a case, the same way a lawyer would, and presented it to his parents of why he should be allowed to go to school. And they let him. Now his mother and father, besides having so much sorrow in their life for losing so many children, were very dedicated to the less fortunate in their area. They were living in Lyon, and there were some poor people there that Frédéric's father took care of. And one day there was a poor family, and the husband was sick, and Frédéric's father managed to put him on the end of his list of home visits. And when he gets there, who does he find but his wife already there trying to help the family? So in the family system, besides the sorrow that he had such good example of Christian people of faith. If I had lost all of these children, if I had lost 11 children, I don't know how deep my faith would be, but their family's faith was very strong, and it extended not only to their belief in God, but to their service. And Frédéric talks about this, and I have quotes here, and I'll give them out to you later. I don't want you reading them while I'm talking, but I'll give them to you so you can look at them, because Frédéric has such a way with words. He says, I am filled with thanks for God for having brought me into the world in one of those situations on the border of hardship and of ease, which is used to privation without permitting enjoyment to be completely unknown, where one can go to bed with all one's wants assuaged, but where one is no longer distraught by the continual clamors of necessity. God knows, with the natural weakness of my character, what dangers the softness of wealth or the abjection of the indigent classes would pose for me. I also feel that this humble position in which I am present has brought me to serve like persons better. So Frederick really, and at this time, he was born in 1813 and lived only to 1853. He died when he was 40. So at this time, there was no such thing as the middle class. But Frederick was middle class and was thankful for it. He saw the virtue in not being so rich and in not being so poor. So Frederick's going to school, and his father has things kind of worked out in his head. His oldest son is going to become a doctor like himself. Frederick's going to become a lawyer. And the younger brother is going to become a priest. So it's all worked out. Frederick doesn't want to be a lawyer, but he is extremely bright. And so he goes to the Sorbonne to study law. And he gets his law degree at age 21, which is pretty remarkable. But what his love is literature. And what his love is languages. Frederick can speak Italian, French, German, Hebrew. He can read Sanskrit, and of course he speaks French, and English. So he's fluent in all of these languages, and he studies world literature, and he teaches the literature of Germany or the United States or England in the native language of that country. He loves what he's doing. But he knows that, as we all know, English professors do not make a lot of money, and lawyers do. So his father really is pushing him to continue with the law. But his mind is filled with thoughts. And he has joined a group run by Emmanuel Ballet, who is the editor of the Catholic newspaper. It's called the Conference of History. And these young college students come together to discuss big thoughts. And among the thoughts they're discussing is liberty, equality, and fraternity, which were the buzzwords of the French Revolution, but which the Catholic Church feels is not Catholic. Now I'm going to say them again. Liberty, equality, fraternity. And the reason was that these words had brought down monarchies. And the Catholic Church was afraid if one monarchy went down and another monarchy went down, what was going to happen to the papacy? Liberty, equality, fraternity. So Frederick began writing on how these are truly Catholic virtues. And he began getting his writing published. At the same time, in this group that was discussing, there were many atheists, because you realize after the French Revolution, Catholicism, Christianity was very much looked down upon with those who had been part of the revolution. So one of the young students at this meeting says, "How do you expect anyone to believe in God when you Christians don't do anything to help the poor?" Frederick thought, and he thought, and he said, "I don't even know how to go about helping the poor. You know, I can deal with the middle class, and I can deal with thoughts, but how do you help people?" So he was directed to a daughter of charity by the name of Rosalie Rondeau. Now, Rosalie was old. She was 77 when he met her, and we all know that's old. And I'm 77, so I can say that. And he met her, and she was blind, and she could no longer go out and serve the poor. But in her day, she had made such an impression on the poor of Paris that to this day, and I had to go and see for myself, and I did. One time when I was in Paris for a meeting, I made them take me to the cemetery where Rosalie is buried, because they say every single day there are fresh roses on her grave brought to her by the people of Paris. Now she lived in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and I went there on a snowy day in February, and on her grave there were fresh roses. And she had such an impact on the poor that she served. And this is an aside, it's not quite on Frédéric, but I think we'll find this interesting. The Daughters of Charity at this point in France were trying to go into central financing, where any money that any local community got went to the mother house, and then the needs were distributed out. Rosalie wouldn't give any donations that she got to the mother house, because it all went directly to the poor. And besides that, she embarrassed them by going to the bishop and begging him to do something for the poor, and when he wouldn't, she got on her hands and knees and threw her arms around his legs and wouldn't let him leave the room until he promised to do something. So this is now going to be Frédéric's teacher. And one of the things that Rosalie stressed was that when you're dealing with people who do not have money or who live in poverty, you do not expect them to come to you. You go to them. So that the young men that Frédéric was with, the college students, would go 2 by 2 into the homes of the poor. And Rosalie would say, you do not decide what they need. You ask them what they want. Because in many cases you go in and say, oh, they need better clothing, or they need this. And what they were looking for were books for their children to read. So you asked them what they wanted, and then you gave them what they wanted, not what you thought they needed. So the young men, all of whom were in graduate school, Frédéric was 20 when this began, he was still in law school, would go out, and the aim was that they each had a profession that they were studying for, and they would take the gifts of that profession with them. So there's a famous case of a woman who was being abused by her partner and the father of her children. They had not been legally married, but he was treating her terribly. And in those days, women couldn't just pick up and take their children and leave. But Frédéric got a judge to sign a paper that said she could, because he knew the law and had her separated from her abusive partner. If there were people studying to be doctors, they could evaluate somehow the health of the family, and they began doing things like that. And then they graduated. And they went home to their own parishes, wherever, some of them in France, some of them in other countries, because many people studying at the Sorbonne were not necessarily French. And they were like, we could do this in our parishes. And that's how the St. Vincent de Paul Society went from a college organization to a parish organization. And in Vincent's lifetime, now he established this in 1833, and he died in 1853. So in 20 years, there were over 2,000 confraternities throughout the world. Vast growth. And it was in young men's society, as different today from an old man's group or an old person's group, because now Vincent de Paul Society takes women as well as men. And in the beginning it was called the Confraternity of Charity, and then became the Vincent de Paul Society. And Vincent says, Frederick says, let us not confine our beliefs to the realm of speculation and theory. Let us take them seriously, and then our life will be their continued expression. So we have to live what we think. Someone in describing Jimmy Carter said they wanted to use some of the words that had been used to describe Mahatma Gandhi, which were that what he thought in his head, he felt in his heart. And what he felt in his heart, he spoke with his lips. And what he spoke with his lips, he lived with his life. And I think if that fit Mahatma Gandhi, if that fit Jimmy Carter, that fit Frédéric Ozanam. And now, because he was obviously such a charismatic leader, if he had all these people following him into this brand new endeavor, and he was also such a wonderful person when he went to visit those who were poor. He said, help honors when to the bread that nourishes, it adds the visit that consoles, the advice that enlightens, the friendly shake of the hand that lifts up the sinking courage. When it treats the poor person with respect, not only as an equal, but as a superior, since he is suffering where perhaps we are incapable of suffering, since he is a messenger of God to us, sent to prove our justice and our charity, and to save us by our works. You know, Vincent always tells us that we are servants of the poor, and they are our masters. And 200 years later, Frederick is repeating the same thing. And he talks about how he always suffered from that rheumatic fever that he had as a child. He was never totally well. And as an adult, he would be not in the best of health. In fact, his classes, as he taught literature especially, were oversubscribed. They were just filled with students, and their only complaint was that he missed teaching because he was sick. No one ever complained about a class that he gave, but he was always struggling with illness. And he talks about no matter how sick or tired he felt, after he climbed the steps to visit someone living in poverty, he would leave being so thankful for what God had given him and the ability he had to serve the other. Now, there was controversy about what Frederick was going to do with his life. Remember, his father wanted him to be a lawyer. There was a priest, Abbé Lacandaire, who was a Dominican, who wanted Frederick to be a Dominican, that this would be absolutely wonderful. And he was struggling with that. And a father, Noat, who said, how can the person who began the greatest lay movement to date in the church become a cleric? You have to stay as a layperson. And Frederick didn't know what to do. He was struggling back and forth. And one day, he was an assistant professor. He went to see one of the professors at the Sorbonne, and while he's talking to him, he sees his daughter, Amélie. She looks interesting. And he finds another question to go back and ask the professor, and then another question, and then another, all of which Frederick really knew the answers to. And he finally asks Amélie to marry him. But he tries to explain to her, and he does it well, that he really doesn't want to be a lawyer. He really wants to be a professor of literature. And right now he's only an associate professor of literature. They were not going to have a lot of money. They were going to have to scrimp and save. And was she willing to do that? And she was. And they married. They married on the 23rd of April. Now, what's interesting is that was Frederick's birthday. But what was also interesting, in the 12 years of their marriage before Frederick died, the 23rd of every month, Frederick brought flowers to his wife. The 23rd of every month. So when there was talk about canonization, I said, I think that's reason to canonize him in itself. A husband who remembers every single month his wedding and does something about it. Not once a year, but every single month. So they were happy together. But as with his own family, they had sorrow. His wife had 2 miscarriages, and then finally their daughter Marie was born. But while all of this was going on, Frederick was trying to find a way to unite the service of the poor with the intellectual movement of the young Catholics in the society. And there is a quote here that I think really fits today. There are too many people who possess too much and want to possess more. There are far more others who do not possess enough, who possess nothing, and who are ready to take it if they are given nothing. Between these two classes, a struggle is brewing, and this struggle threatens to be terrible, with the power of gold on one side and the power of despair on the other. We should throw ourselves between these two enemy armies, at least, to soften the impact, if not to prevent it. Our young age and lowly position make easier this role as mediators, which our statute as Christian renders compulsory. Which our statute as Christians renders compulsory. To stand and mediate between the extremes in society is not an option. And I want to say, when he says our young age, some of us could say our old age makes it easier for us to do this than it might for someone else. He really believes that we have to learn to work with each other when we disagree. Ah, my dear friend, what a troublous but instructive time it is through which we are passing. We may perish, but we must not regret having lived in it. Let us learn from it. Let us learn, first of all, to defend our belief without hating our adversaries. To appreciate those who do not think as we do, to recognize that there are Christians in every camp and that God can be served now as always. Let us complain less of our times and more of ourselves. Let us not be discouraged. Let us be better. Let us not be discouraged. Let us be better. I find of all the people in our history that I'm familiar with, I mean, as we talk about Vincent, Louise, Elizabeth, Rosalie, Frederick's writing is most contemporary in style, and you think he could have written it yesterday. You know, how do we listen to those with whom we disagree? How can we disagree and not condemn the other. I mean, this is what he was struggling with in his day. And Frederick had failures. I mean, we talked about the great success of the Confraternity of Charity and of the Vincent de Paul Society. Frederick tried to be the editor of a Catholic newspaper, and it failed. They were running for whatever the government was at this time. There were 1,000 people in the legislature. I can't even imagine that. And France is not as big a country as the United States. So they were electing 1,000 people. And Frederick ran for office thinking he would win, and he didn't. So politics, he did not succeed in. Writing for a newspaper, he did not succeed. But finding a way for people to serve the poor, he succeeded in. So much so that it was not just the Catholics who were impressed by him. There was a Protestant minister who had taken up a collection in his church and came to Frederick with a donation for the poor because they knew that this St. Vincent de Paul Society would give it out. And one of the members said, oh yes, we'll give it out. First to the Catholics and then to the others. And Frederick said, well, give me the money back. I'll give it back to the minister. Because that's not who we say we are. We serve those living in poverty no matter what they believe, and we do not make their belief necessary to be served. So they took a vote, and people voted with Frederick, and the money was given out to people as they needed it. But he was so convinced that God loved the poor. God did not just love the Catholic poor. And you do not have to prove your faith in order to get money. As Frederick went through, more and more people were convinced of his holiness. And Abbé Lacondère went to the Pope. He was Pope Pius IX. And he went to him and he was talking about this young man, Frédéric Ozanam, who had done these marvelous things. And Lacondère said to the Pope, and this is a story that we get from Pope John Paul I. Where John Paul I found the story, I'm not sure, but he's the one who told it. So it comes through John Paul I that this is what Pius IX said. Lacondère said he was a young man and he had such a great future in the church. And then he fell for the trap of marriage. And Pope Pius IX said, oh, I didn't realize. I thought we had 7 sacraments. I didn't realize we had 6 sacraments in a trap. So it was very hard for the contemporary clerics to realize that someone could be as intellectual sense of Christianity, of Catholicism, could write about that, could serve the poor, and could organize the masses without being a cleric. And so he was able to do that, all the while suffering greatly with his health. He, at age 40, his health was so bad that they sent him to Italy. I guess Italy, Elizabeth Seton and her husband went to Italy because he was sick. Frederick goes to Italy because that's the place to get cured. The doctors sent him to Italy to warm weather to rest and become better. And he writes this statement, which I'm going to read. It's a little long, but I think it's really beautiful and it's pertinent. Remember, this man is 40 years old, has a wife and a 7-year-old child. And he writes, I come if thou callest me, and I have no right to complain. Thou hast given 40 years of life to a creature who entered the world sickly, fragile, destined to die 10 times, if 10 times he had not been rescued by the tenderness and intelligence of a father and mother. Let not my people be scandalized if thou dost not see good now to work a miracle in order to save me. 5 years ago thou didst bring me back almost from death, and was not this delay granted me to do penance and become better? Ah, the prayers that were sent up to thee then were heard. Why should those who are being offered now, and in so far great a number on my behalf, be lost? Perhaps thou will answer them, Lord, in another way. That will give me courage, resignation, peace of soul, and the inapplicable consolation that accompany thy real presence. That will enable me to find in illness a source of merit and of blessing. These blessings that will call to fall on my wife and my child, on all those to whom my labors perchance would have been less useful than my sufferings. If I express the years of my life with bitterness before thee, it is because of sin that have sullied them. But when I consider the graces that have enriched them, I look back upon them, Lord, with gratitude to thee. If thou should claim me to the sick bed for the days that I have yet to live, they would be too short to thank thee for the days that I have lived. If these pages be the last that I ever write, may they be a hymn to thy goodness. Would that we could write something like that if we're 80, or 90, or 40. Just so thankful for the graces and the time that he had, and willingness to use his suffering for the benefits of others, just as he used his physical service for the benefits of others. In Italy, he became very ill, and he didn't want to die in a foreign land. Even though he was born there, he didn't want to die in a foreign land. So they got him back as far as Marseille, and he died in Marseille on September 7th, 1853. 40 years old. That's his feast day. Oh, he died on September 8th, but his feast day is September 7th. Because the 8th was already the birthday of the Iran, so they moved it around. But his love for his family, his love for the intellectual thought that is necessary to live a Christian life, and his love for the service of those who have less, all combined together in his love for God. Now, I did tell you one of his brothers became a priest, and he was a Dominican. So when Frederick died, he took his body and had it buried within the walls of the Dominican monastery. And I know some of us here were able to be there. And they built over it a statue and a depiction of the Good Samaritan. But it was in the enclosure of a Dominican house, which meant that his wife and daughter could not visit. There was still this lack of understanding of what it meant to be a layperson, a husband, a father in the church. I can't imagine how hard that must have been for her, because, it was, the clerics were now claiming him. They couldn't get him in life, but they got him in death. And he was there. Now, he has been beatified. We're still waiting for a canonization. And Rosalie Rondeau has been beatified in that grave that she is buried in Paris, which has has the roses on it, is buried in a separate section from all the other daughters of charity. They didn't even claim her in death. And there wasn't a single daughter of charity nor a Vincentian priest at her funeral. But the poor claimed her, and they still do. And the Vincent de Paul Society now claims her as a co-founder with Frédéric, because it was her knowledge that helped these young men learn how to serve those who lived in poverty. So, any questions, any thoughts, anything that you want to say about Frédéric, anything you learned that you didn't know before, anything?
I didn't know he was in so much pain.
Constant pain and suffering. I can't imagine. It was all heart related, how he ever climbed all those steps to serve the poor, and Peg?
I was wondering about this naming of the group as a Vincent de Paul Society. Was that because of Rosalie?
It was because of Rosalie. Rosalie kind of introduced them to Vincent de Paul. And so she put that name on it. She helped him with that. It is still in most countries of the world, and they are still serving people who live in poverty. Now, it's not as much. There is a Vincent de Paul Society at St. John's University, and probably at some other colleges. It's not as much as a young person's group now as it had been. Many of you know Sandy Figueroa, who is an associate of ours. She moderates a young group of Vincentians, which is what they call themselves, Vincent de Paul Society members in Queens. So that there are some, but there is, that's how it started. When you think this was started by 20-year-olds, 21-year-olds. I thought when the few brief years I worked in campus ministry, there was a young student scholar, a young man, and he was a freshman. And it was probably by February, he came in one day, he said, "Sister, I understand it." I said, "Oh, okay, I understand what?" He said, "I understand what it's all about now." I said, "Okay, what is it all about now?" And he said, "It's all about relationships. It's about my relationship with the other volunteers. It's about my relationship with the clients we serve. It's about my relationship with their children. That's what it's about. It's about relationship. It's not necessarily just about the food." Now, I think he was probably 18, then maybe 19. But after 6 months of service, he understood it. And that's what these young men understood then. They understood what this was about. Anyone else have anything? Viv?
This morning I watched, a long TV show on President Carter, and it was really fascinating because how much he and his wife stayed in service to the poor and to others while he was in office. It was really very inspiring because, of course, he was a president, and we just saw, at least I just saw on TV, his burial, and the work that they did together for poor people in other countries as well as in the States was amazing to me. I always thought of them as like a modeled married couple with great values and, just a sterling president. But he was this whole aspect of their lives that was dedicated to service, not only for people in the States, but people in other countries.
Right. And I think that's, as the Vincent de Paul Society grew, other countries, to other places, and all from these college students who went home and brought this with them. You know, what does the Jesuit say? Give us a young person for X number of years and we ruin them for life, you know, they'll never be the same. Well, I think that was this model. You have them involved in service and teach them about serving people who are poor, and they're hooked for the rest of their lives. At least Frederick was. Anything else? Carol?
I was just wondering, Marianne, your knowledge of what's going on with the congregation in Paris. What is this? Is that spirit lost forever of the young people, or is there new bursts of light occurring now?
Do you know?
It seems to me, I think people, I mean, not that we don't have wonderful young people who do things here and there, but I was thinking specifically of the congregate work that they did.
You know, when we were in Paris in what was the year, 2000, were we in Paris? What was 2003, Paris to say. There is Vincent de Paul and Rosalie Rondeau's name and picture is everywhere. Now, whether that gets carried through, but they have not been forgotten. There is a building which just blew my mind. The tour bus stopped and told us to cross the street and stand over there. So we crossed the street and stand over there and look up at this building. And the way the building was built, with the crevices, the light, and the shadow, there is a portrait of Vincent de Paul. Not painted, but built into this. There are so many streets. There is the Rosalie Rondeau this. So that memory is there. Whether how it is acted out, I am not sure. Mary.
I wonder if Conor would be willing to stand and let us know something about what the Seton Scholars are doing by way of service to the poor.
Sure. You want me to stand? Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Do you want me to speak there? Or no?
Can you hear him, or do you need him up here? We need him up here.
Sure. Oh gosh.
Conor is the campus minister of our university.
Taking over your spot.
No problem.
That was wonderful. Yes, I'm Conor. I'm the director of Mission and Ministry. Really lovely to learn so much about Frederick. I didn't know half of those things. I will say, oh gosh.
Whoops.
It didn't go down.
No.
I will say I was just on a personal mission trip with some friends to the Dominican Republic, where I lived for a year out of college. It is a mission run by the Diocese of Rockville Center. So I was there for a week because my very good friend, who's a priest in his 80s, who was there as a priest for 20 years, was having a statue dedicated to him at the retreat center, so I joined him. And one whole day we spent with the St. Vincent de Paul Society in the Dominican Republic, delivering bags of food and clothes to the very, very poorest folks who live up in the mountains. We were about 2 or 3 miles away from the Haitian border. So these were homes that were, very ramshackle, corrugated tin roofs, wooden doors, and dirt floors. Had to go 3-4 hours up into the mountains over dirt roads, across rivers, into homes where people, 9-10 people living in a single home with just one room, cooking outside, outhouse. And so the St. Vincent de Paul Society was very faithful in delivering food to them several times a month. So it's really amazing to see where the Vincent de Paul Society. I would love to bring students there, and that's something I'm working on right now, is to bring some of our students who are in the nursing program and the business program to places like Guatemala and to the Dominican Republic to do some of that work. We continue to be very faithful to the SSLP, the Seton Service Leadership Program students. We have 10 every year, and they work in a number of different areas, specifically with people experiencing poverty in different ways. We work in Food insecurity with Vincent's Table. We're there weekly or bi-weekly, handing out food with Vincent's Table as a partnership with the Sisters of Charity. We do midnight runs 2 times a month, in which we're handing out clothes and socks and toiletries and food to people who are experiencing homelessness. They are involved in the Riverhill Neighborhood House here, growing food for our local community. They work with the Hebrew Home right across the street, visiting people in the elderly care center there. They're working with a number of local fridges. Riverdale Neighborhood House has a fridge. The Friendly Fridge, which is on 242nd Street, so these are places where people can donate food, and then food is distributed to people who are really experiencing some serious food insecurities. You know, food has gotten so expensive, so we're seeing so much food insecurity in the Bronx. And we're going to POTS, which I know is a huge part of the legacy of the Sisters of Charity on Webster Avenue in the Bronx. So we're there twice a month with our SSLP students as well. So those are some. We're continuing to hope to build new partnerships, and I would love to bring some to the St. Vincent